As always, I'm going to start with a look at global energy commodities, and we look at Brent. Did recover significantly during the week, but closed down on Fridays. Concerns around the strength of the US dollar, which may make it a bit more expensive for those who hold other currencies to buy crude oil, of course, dollar denominated. So some market concerns around forecasts around the greenback there. Also affected WTI crude, natural gas also down, but RBOB gasoline staying resilient, ending the week at 0.52% up. Let's take a look at global equities markets, as always, starting with Nigeria here. The all-share index ended the week down by 10 basis points, closing at 99,743.05 points. Equity capital markets at 56.42 trillion naira. Let's take a look at Africa as well, starting with the stock markets in Joburg. On the back of the coalition government in that country, in South Africa, and I'll get my stats on screen now. There we go. The market in Johannesburg ended the week 38 basis points up. Accra in Ghana was flat. Nairobi was down by 1.54%, and of course Casablanca was up by 0.02%. Let's take a look at Europe. Not a good look there for European stock markets, led by the Euro Stock 600 index, which was down. FTSE also down, DAX down, Paris was down. Macron there facing quite a lot of socioeconomic unrest around the economic situation, and IBEX 35 in Spain was also down, mostly driven by tech and banking stocks across Europe were down this past week. Let's take a look at my business top picks for the week. I'm really excited about this first one, actually, because Hyundai, as they say in South Korea, it's a South Korean automaker, is doing an IPO of its Indian subsidiary, which could be India's biggest. We haven't seen a major auto listing since Maruti in India for almost 2 decades. That is valuing Hyundai in India at about $30 billion. It's going to list about 17.5% of its shares on the public markets. A lot of that is driven by demand in India. And India is actually Hyundai's 3rd largest auto market around the world. So this is good news. Could be the biggest, what they call the mother of all IPOs in the Indian market. Very good news there for India, as well as the auto market around the world. Speaking of transportation, Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun was under fire in the US Senate. Boeing, of course, recently has faced a lot of concerns around its air safety. If you recall, earlier this year in January, one of the doors on a Boeing, or one of the panels rather, on a Boeing aircraft actually fell out mid-flight. So there are concerns there around his pay package, his bonus package. The board approved a significant bonus package for him. And the US Senate is saying Boeing and its leaders are not taking safety seriously. Of course, Boeing and Airbus are the world's biggest 2 aircraft makers. He actually apologized for the safety woes, but there's concerns around that the board and the leadership of the company are not taking enough accountability. We'll be watching that story as it unfolds, because most of us who travel use a Boeing or an Airbus aircraft. So we should all take an interest in the story. Ghana reports strong GDP in the first quarter of this year. Good news for the Ghanaian government and the ruling NPP party led by Nana Akufo-Addo. GDP in Q1 was up 4.7% compared to the same quarter the previous year. As we know, Ghana is trying to restructure around $44 billion worth of debt. And in fact, it's still holding restructuring negotiations with about the creditors that hold about 13 billion worth of bonds in Ghana. So this is good news. The IMF has helped to support the government's restructuring program to the tune of about 3 billion. And there are a lot of fiscal austerity measures that the government has to take. So these GDP figures coming in strong for Q1 actually may help shore up the NPP, the ruling party's political prospects in elections in Ghana in December. Good news, therefore, a country in West Africa. Another country in West Africa, good news for Côte d'Ivoire, or the Ivory Coast as we call it in English. It expects a 3-fold oil output increase by 2027. Côte d'Ivoire, of course, discovered oil and gas maybe about a decade ago. It's currently producing around 60,000 barrels a day and hopes to ramp that up to around 200,000 barrels a day by 2027. Of course, Italian multinational Eni is the biggest producer in Côte d'Ivoire, and it sees great prospects on the horizon. Of course, this is good news for Alassane Ouattara, the president, and the government in terms of revenues for the country. Côte d'Ivoire also exports oil and gold and some other key minerals. And finally, the final story on my top picks for this week is OpenAI rival Anthropic has announced a new chat bot. That chatbot is called Chorus. I think it's called Chorus 3.5, and it's set to rival the OpenAI chatbot that we do know. This is big news, actually, because Anthropic recently received about $7.5 billion in funding from the likes of companies like Google and Amazon. So we're seeing rivalry hit up in a market that is said to be worth almost $1 trillion over the next decade. And that's it for my top picks for the week. And now for some other top stories from around the world. We'll start in South America. Brazil's central bank is expected to put an end to its nearly annual cycle of interest rate reductions as officials battle to contain inflation expectations that are soaring above target and to deal with a full-blown crisis of credibility. With the exception of who will predict a fourth quarter reduction, every expert questioned by a survey by Bloomberg believes the bank that's run by Roberto Campos Neto will maintain the Selic at 10.5%. As for traders, most are pricing in rate hikes later in the year since they envision a halt to interest rates movements as well. Here in Nigeria, Nigeria's inflation rate has risen to 33.95% in May as prices of food and non-alcoholic beverages continue to surge. The CPI measures the average change over time in the prices of goods and services consumed by people for day-to-day living. Between January and May, headline inflation has risen, surging from 29.9% in January to 33.9% in May, representing an increase of 13.5%. The report added that the inflation rate climbed to a more than 28-year high in May on higher food and transport prices. And still on food and transport, according to Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, in a statement released via his spokesperson on Tuesday, he said external factors like poor roads, banditry, and terrorism are to blame for 60 to 70% of the food produced in the nation being lost, which drives up food prices. Still on Nigeria, on Thursday, the joint venture between Total Energies and the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPC, inked the $550 million final investment decision for the Ubeta field in the oil-producing Niger Delta. At the NNPC headquarters in Abuja, the deal was signed by NNPC and its partners. The Ubeta field, which was discovered in 1964 in the eastern part of the Delta west of Port Harcourt, will produce roughly 350 million standard cubic feet per day of gas and 10,000 barrels a day of associated liquids once it comes online. The World Bank has indicated that it may cancel a significant loan of $1.5 billion in Nigeria if the country fails to adhere to specific requirements outlined in financing agreements. This was stated in the financial agreement documents for the Development Policy Financial Program Project, Nigeria Reforms for Economic Stabilization to Enable Transformation document. According to the World Bank, the borrower will only be able to withdraw a particular loan tranche if the bank is happy with the program's advancement, the macroeconomic policy framework, and the necessary steps. If issues are not resolved within 90 days, the World Bank reserves the right to cancel the remaining loan. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Olusegun Alebiosu was officially appointed as First Bank of Nigeria Limited's Managing Director and CEO on Thursday. In a statement filed with the Nigeria Exchange Limited, the holding company stated and noted that this appointment is pending approval from the central bank. Alebiosu has been serving as the acting MD of First Bank since April 22, following the resignation of Adesola Adeduton, who had 8 months remaining on his contract. In a ceremony held on Wednesday in the political capital Pretoria, South Africa President Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in for a second term. This was his first time in office during the 30-year reign of the nation, having been re-elected with the support of coalition parties. After his ANC party lost its majority parliamentary position in an election held last month, Ramaphosa is now expected to name a new cabinet in a new coalition government. Still on Africa, Kenya's parliament has approved the contentious Finance Bill 2024 to move on to the committee stage in spite of strong resistance from MPs, civil society organizations, and Occupy Parliament demonstrators. 115 MPs opposed the bill, while 204 supported it. After this, the bill will proceed to a third reading and committee consideration. It will be delivered to President Ruto for ratification if it passes a third reading. The measure was approved by the majority of MPs from the ruling Kenya Kwanza coalition and a small number from the opposition Azimio coalition, allowing the tax increases that the National Treasury claims the nation sorely needs. Finally, the Bank of England on Thursday opted to keep interest rates steady at its June meeting, but described the decision as finely balanced after UK inflation hits its 2% target. In a statement, the MPC noted inflation had reached the central bank's target and said indicators of short-term inflation expectations and wage growth had eased. The central bank's key rate is at a 16-year high of 5.25%, where it has stood since August last year. Other central banks in Europe have already begun to ease monetary policy, including the European Central Bank, the Swiss National Bank, and Sweden's Riksbank, as they seek to reboot economic growth. Well, that's it for our top global stories.